On the fateful day of April 19, 2008, the tranquility of a hospital was shattered by the arrival of a visibly aged man whose demeanor was utterly laced with panic and nervousness. Clutched in his trembling grasp was a frail 19-year-old girl whose fragile form was racked with unconsciousness. As medical staff sought to unravel the mystery surrounding her identity and lineage, they were met with an abyss of silence, as there was no mother to be found and no trace of familial history, as if the girl had sprung into existence from the shadows. But the chilling truth soon emerged from the depths of despair, revealing that the girl was the granddaughter of the aged man, none other than Josef Fritzl, whose daughter Elisabeth had been held captive in the bowels of their own home for over 2 decades by Josef. Behind closed doors, Elisabeth endured unspeakable horrors, with thousands of rape, and then gave birth to 7 children, fathered by her own very flesh and blood. Josef Fritzl's early years in Amstetten, Austria, were marked by adversity and abandonment. Born on April 9, 1935, as the only child of Josef Fritzl Sr. and Maria Fritzl, his childhood took a difficult turn when his father, described as a severe alcoholic, left the family when Josef was just 4 years old. Raised by his mother in the absence of paternal guidance, he faced the challenges of growing up without a father figure. The burden of his father's alcoholism weighed heavily on the family, leaving young Josef to navigate life's trials largely on his own. Tragically, Josef Fritzl Sr.'s life was cut short during World War II when he was killed in action while serving as a soldier in the Wehrmacht in 1944. This loss, coupled with the absence of his father throughout his formative years, left a profound impact on Josef Fritzl, setting the stage for the unsettling events that would later unfold in his adulthood. In 1956, at the tender age of 21, Josef Fritzl Jr. took the vows of marriage with Rosemary, a young woman born on September 23, 1939, who was just 17 years old. At the time, Josef held a prominent position in society as a well-known and respected electrical engineer. Their union, seemingly the start of a typical family journey, blossomed into a household that eventually comprised 3 sons and 4 daughters. Among their offspring was Elisabeth, born on April 6, 1966, whose fate would tragically deviate from the ordinary trajectory of familial life. Along with his married life responsibilities, Josef embarked on the completion of his education at an HTL technical college, and subsequently earned a qualification in electrical engineering, that took him through various roles and industries until he secured a job at Voestalpine in Linz, where he honed his skills and garnered experience in the field. Subsequently from 1969 to 1971, Josef transitioned to a position at a construction material firm in Amstetten, further diversified his professional background, and then transitioned into sales as a technical equipment salesman, traversing the length and breadth of Austria. Despite his outward facade of professionalism and success, Josef's hidden darkness was thrust into the public eye in 1967, when he broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse and subjected her to a horrific assault at knife point. This abominable crime led to his arrest and subsequent imprisonment, where he served 12 months of an 18-month sentence before being released. The prison didn't seem to have much effect on him, and alongside managing his apartment building in Amstetten, he also ventured into property rental, owning and renting out several other properties. However, his reign of terror persisted, with further accusations surfacing. Being well known for indecent exposure, he was then implicated as a suspect in the attempted of a 21-year-old around the same period. However, undeterred by legal troubles, Josef made a significant investment in 1972, purchasing a guest house and adjacent campsite at Lake Mondsee. Despite retiring from active employment at the age of 60 in 1995, Josef remained engaged in commercial activities, leveraging his accumulated wealth and assets. Together with his wife, Josef operated this establishment until 1996, underscoring his entrepreneurial spirit and ambition in the hospitality sector. In public, Josef was widely recognized as a friendly and respected member of the community, known for his quiet demeanor and impressive engineering skills. People in the neighborhood greeted him warmly as he went about his daily routines, whether it was at the bank, the police department, or simply out and about. His wealth and dedication to his family only added to his reputation, and many admired his ability to provide for his large household. However, behind this facade of normalcy, a darker reality lurked that was visible only to a select few. Children who visited the Fritzl residence, particularly Elisabeth's friends, were met with unusual restrictions as they were consistently denied entry by Josef, who seemed determined to maintain strict control over his household. Elisabeth's schoolmates noticed her distress over this, but were met with silence when they inquired about it, as she feared repercussions from her father if she dared to speak out. A father of 7, Josef reportedly then began abusing her own 11-year-old daughter Elisabeth, who was described as a wonderful and obedient little girl, always following instructions and exhibiting impeccable manners. The torture of the innocent girl not only remained mental but slowly extended to become physical and sexual as well. The toxic atmosphere fostered by Josef's presence seeped into every aspect of their daily existence, poisoning the interactions between him and Elisabeth. Their relationship became a battleground, marred by frequent clashes and heated arguments that often spiraled into violence. Elisabeth bore the brunt of Josef's volatile temper, enduring beatings as a grim consequence of their confrontations. The atmosphere of terror within Josef's household spared no member of the family, as his abusive tendencies extended to his wife and all of their children. It was alleged that Josef subjected his wife to so much physical abuse in front of their children, that Rosemary once suffered from a broken foot while pregnant. Despite this widespread mistreatment, Elisabeth's refusal to submit to her authoritarian father's dominance set her apart, making her a primary target for his rage. Josef also enforced strict isolation on Elisabeth, particularly by never allowing her outside and often accompanying her everywhere she went. Furthermore, he invaded her privacy by reading her diary and depriving her of any personal space or autonomy. Trapped in a cycle of fear and abuse, Elisabeth faced the relentless onslaught of her father's brutality, her cries for freedom stifled by the weight of his oppressive rule. After completing her government-required education at the age of 15, Elisabeth embarked on a course to become a waitress. At this time, despite her quiet and somewhat shy demeanor, she managed to cultivate friendships and felt at ease with her close circle of companions. However, as she matured, her academic performances began to wane, and she gradually withdrew into herself, becoming more of a loner. Though she retained her inherent kindness and reserved nature, the challenges of adolescence seemed to weigh heavily on her, leading to a period of introspection and solitude. However, the shadows of abuse looming in her home compelled her to make a daring decision. Before finishing her waitress training, in January 1983 at the age of 16, Elisabeth, along with a friend from work, fled from the torment she endured at home and sought refuge in Vienna. Despite their attempt to escape, the police located Elisabeth within 3 weeks and returned her to her parents. Upon her return, she resumed her waitress training and eventually secured a job in the nearby city of Linz. While she hoped for a positive turn in her life, unfortunately Elisabeth's ordeal was far from over, as the dark truth of her familial circumstances continued to cast a long and distressing shadow over her existence. Amidst the familial misery and the cultural resonance of Prince's iconic album, Purple Rain, and the inaugural voyage of the Space Shuttle Discovery, the world witnessed a momentous transformation as the country of Upper Volta embraced a new identity as Burkina Faso. However, during these global milestones, a darker narrative unfolded behind closed doors. In the stifling heat of a scorching summer day, on August 28, 1984, Josef Fritzl executed a sinister plot by luring Elisabeth into a carefully constructed prison chamber, concealed within the walls of their family home, and Elisabeth soon found herself ensnared in a web of deceit and manipulation, orchestrated by the very man who should have protected her. Under the guise of a fatherly request for assistance, Josef led Elisabeth, who had just turned 18, into the basement of their family home, where Josef had spent 6 years covertly constructing a chamber of horrors, disguised as an underground fallout shelter. In the midst of the Cold War tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union, the fear of nuclear warfare loomed large, and it made the idea of constructing a shelter to protect against potential fallout seem reasonable to some. However, Josef's elaborate construction of what he claimed to be a fallout shelter was merely a facade that was meticulously crafted to conceal the sinister reality of what lay beneath. As Elisabeth innocently assisted her father in securing the final door to her supposed shelter, she unwittingly stepped into her worst nightmare. With a chilling indifference to her very existence, Josef slammed the door shut, and held an ether-soaked towel on her face until she fell unconscious, then proceeded to throw her into the chamber, and seal Elisabeth inside the prison, which marked the outset of her long and harrowing journey, into the depths of darkness and despair, unbeknownst to the world at large. The chamber, a new house for Elisabeth, was a cramped and claustrophobic room, cleverly hidden behind a small square entrance within their family home. The entrance featured an elaborate keypad lock, which Josef claimed only he could operate in efforts to add an additional layer of security to the chamber. Accessing the final entry door of the room required navigating through a complex network of 8 locked doors, forming a labyrinthine maze that prevented any attempts at escape. The conditions were dire and oppressive inside the chamber, as its confined space lacked natural light and ventilation, which further contributed to its suffocating atmosphere. The room was sparsely furnished, with only basic amenities provided for survival. Elisabeth was forced to endure unimaginable suffering in this grim environment, completely cut off from the outside world and subjected to Josef's control and manipulation. The sudden disappearance of Elisabeth sparked a frantic search effort led by her mother Rosemary, who wasted no time in filing a missing persons report with the authorities. Josef's account to the authorities painted a disturbing picture. He claimed that Elisabeth had run away to join a cult, citing what he perceived as her growing interest in the occult as evidence. However, Rosemary and other family members disputed Josef's assertions, stating that they had not observed any signs of Elisabeth's involvement with cults or the occult. Despite this discrepancy, the police recalled a previous report of Elisabeth running away with a coworker, leading them to suspect that she had simply fled once again. As the investigation unfolded, Elisabeth's extended family rallied together in a united effort to locate her. Her aunt, in particular, undertook a tireless search, scouring train stations and reaching out to the homeless population, in a desperate bid to find any trace of her missing niece. Despite their exhaustive efforts, Elisabeth remained elusive, leaving behind all her belongings, including personal identifications. Also due to Elisabeth being 18 years old, investigators faced limitations in their actions because even if they located her, they couldn't compel her to return home if she chose to stay away. Consequently, they hesitated to actively search for her, deeming it potentially futile and categorizing her as a runaway. Elisabeth's friends expressed deep skepticism regarding the notion of her joining a cult, citing her solitary nature and lack of social interactions. They attested that Elisabeth seldom ventured out with them, rarely mingled with new acquaintances, and displayed no inclination towards cult involvement. Her social circle found it implausible that she could have encountered individuals associated with a cult, let alone integrated into such a group. Despite Rosemary's relentless efforts, almost a month elapsed with no trace of Elisabeth. Then in a macabre turn of events, Josef introduced a sinister twist to the investigation by delivering a letter to the police, which was seemingly penned by Elisabeth herself. Postmarked from Braunau, the contents of the letters conveyed a disturbing message, conveying that Elisabeth had voluntarily left home, due to dissatisfaction with her family life, and was now staying with one of her friends. However, the letter issued a stark warning to her parents not to search for her, or she would leave the country if they persisted. This letter became a pivotal piece of evidence and led the police to conclude that she had just willingly chosen to vanish from her home. Consequently, They completely closed the case and attributed her disappearance to voluntary actions on her part. However, the horrifying truth emerged years later. Josef had forced Elisabeth into writing the letter during her harrowing captivity in the basement, along with a series of letters that were going to follow up. Josef's visits to Elisabeth in the underground prison became a grim routine, occurring almost daily to deliver food and supplies, starting on her second day of captivity. However, these visits were not solely for provisions but mainly for repeated acts of sometimes assaulting her multiple times a day. In a chilling revelation, Josef admitted to distancing himself from these heinous acts of by avoiding eye contact with Elisabeth during the assaults, as he knew and was likely aware that he was doing wrong. Initially, Elisabeth was confined to her bed, unable to move freely. However, he later removed the chain entirely, mainly for the purpose of providing himself with better access to assault her sexually. Exploiting his position of power, he mercilessly transformed her into a sex slave, and she reportedly endured over 3,000 instances of at the hands of her own father, with each one serving as a brutal violation of her autonomy and dignity. For the initial 5 years of her captivity, Elisabeth endured profound isolation, hardly speaking to anyone. Cut off from the outside world and confined to the darkness of the underground prison, she grappled with the suffocating loneliness of her existence. Without human contact or interaction, each passing day weighed heavily on her spirit and exacerbated the torment of her confinement. In the absence of any companionship or solace, she battled against despair and clung to the fragile hope of one day breaking free from the confines of her captivity. However, her isolation was punctuated when she fell pregnant with her own father at the age of 23. Josef provided her with nothing more than a medical textbook from the 1960s and some limited supplies, instructing her to navigate the complexities of pregnancy entirely on her own. This heart-wrenching situation forced Elisabeth to endure the childbirth process in isolation, deprived of the basic support and care a mother would typically receive. Against all odds, Elisabeth successfully gave birth to a girl named Kirsten on August 30, 1988, who would stay within the oppressive confines of the cellar for the next 19 years with her mother. Over her 24 years of captivity, Elisabeth's unimaginable suffering extended beyond her own torment to the innocent lives she brought into the world while imprisoned in the cellar. She gave birth to a total of 6 children other than Kirsten, named Monica, Lisa, Alexander, Stefan, Felix, and another unnamed baby who tragically passed away shortly after birth. Elisabeth requested that Josef seek medical help for the newborn, but she was refused, and after the baby's death, Josef just disposed of the infant's remains by incinerating them in the property's heater and eradicating any trace of the child's existence. While terrifying, these births provided Elisabeth with much-needed companionship and a newfound sense of purpose, as they offered solace and motivation to endure after years of contemplating suicide, and served as a ray of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. Following the birth of their 4th child in 1994, Elisabeth requested Josef's enlargement of their prison. Astonishingly, Josef acceded to her request, albeit with the chilling condition that Elisabeth and her children would solely be responsible for excavating the soil themselves, using only their bare hands, and no tools would be provided. Despite the immense physical and emotional toll, they persevered, and finally, after years of arduous effort, their prison was enlarged from 35 to 55 square meters, yet the ceilings could only reach 5 feet and 6 inches. Somewhere during this period, Josef's sister-in-law observed his rigid routine of entering the basement every morning at 9 a.m., supposedly to work on blueprints and machinery. Despite his explanation, he emphasized that no one should disturb him during these sessions, and displayed a stern demeanor that deterred any attempts at interference. His intense focus on his purported business in the basement, coupled with a known quick temper, dissuaded those who were curious from probing further into his activities. Consequently, even individuals with suspicions about his actions refrained from investigating the truth of what was happening downstairs. This combination of Fritzl's strict control over access to the basement, and his intimidating demeanor effectively prevented anyone from uncovering the horrifying reality of Elisabeth's captivity beneath the family home. While suffering unimaginable circumstances and surviving under the footsteps of her family house, Elisabeth continued to exhibit unwavering maternal love and strive to provide her children with a semblance of education and normalcy. Using only the bare essentials, she transformed the room into a vibrant oasis for the children. Armed with nothing more than a handful of markers and her boundless creativity, she adorned the walls with flowers and friendly animals with the intention of providing the children with a focal point amidst the sterile environment. Over time, Josef relented slightly, allowing the children access to rudimentary amenities such as a television, radio, and cassette player. Yet, the harsh reality of their existence remained, with meager meals cooked on hot plates, and a malfunctioning refrigerator that often spoiled everything in their small living area. To further assert his control, Josef resorted to physical punishment by inflicting beatings upon Elisabeth, and subjecting her and her children to agonizing torment by cutting off the electricity completely for several days. In the darkness of her captivity, she suffered immeasurable physical and psychological trauma, while her spirit was crushed under the weight of Josef's depravity, and among the countless atrocities inflicted upon her. One of the most abhorrent was Josef's sadistic use of violation and coercion to force Elisabeth into recreating scenes from the pornographic videos in front of their children. Despite the severe limitations imposed by her captivity, Elisabeth refused to succumb to despair, and instead focused on providing her children with love, care, and education. She decided to take on the role of teacher for her children, despite the lack of conventional resources. In contrast, Josef used psychological manipulation and intimidation tactics to highlight the depths of his cruelty to his captives, by instilling fear through threats of gas and electrocution, to prevent any attempts at escape from the chamber. For reasons yet to be fully understood, Josef made the disturbing decision to selectively bring 3 of his 7 children, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, shortly after they were born from his horrific crimes, into the public sphere, integrating them into the household above ground alongside him, his wife Rosemary, and the rest of the family. This eerie development unfolded through a calculated and sinister ploy, engineered by Josef himself as he methodically placed each of the chosen children on the family porch at different intervals, strategically coupling their appearance with letters forcefully written by Elisabeth. These letters, penned under duress, bore false claims by her, and stated her inability to manage the responsibilities of parenthood, thus relinquishing custody of the children. This callous manipulation ensured that while 3 of Elisabeth's offspring enjoyed a semblance of normalcy above ground, the 4 remaining children languished in the dark and desolate confines of the cellar, enduring continued isolation and deprivation under the watchful eye of their captor. Shockingly, local social services authorities approved the 3 children, as Josef managed to provide a convincing explanation for the sudden appearances of each of his 3 infant grandchildren on his doorstep. When the second child, the 10-month-old Monica, mysteriously appeared on Fritzl's doorstep on the pushchair in December 1994, it was Rosemary who first stumbled upon the chilling scene. In the dead of night, the plaintive cries of a baby pierced the stillness, drawing Rosemary's attention. Startled by the sight of the infant, she was further unsettled, and a phone rang shortly thereafter, in which a voice purportedly belonging to Elisabeth pleaded for assistance in caring for the child. However, Rosemary's keen intuition immediately sensed something awry, as she suggested that the voice emanating from the other end was not live, but rather a pre-recorded message from someone that would later turn out to be Josef, and thus she highly cast doubt on the authenticity of the call. Sensing deception, she promptly terminated the call. However, to her astonishment, the phone rang once more, the same recorded message replaying upon answering. This disturbing revelation, mounted by her shock at Elisabeth's apparent knowledge of their new and unlisted phone number, prompted Rosemary to alert the authorities. However, because there was little to no evidence supporting her claims, the case went quiet. In hindsight, several individuals observed peculiarities in Josef's behavior that hinted at the sinister reality concealed within the Fritzl household. His tenants renting a room directly above the basement reported strange occurrences, such as noises in the night, that Josef dismissed as mere plumbing issues. Another tenant noted his dog's inexplicable agitation, though searches for the source of the disturbance yielded nothing suspicious. Despite these red flags, neither tenants nor Fritzl's own family raised significant concerns or reported his unusual behavior. Josef's increasingly frequent visits to the basement, his separate living quarters from his wife, and his false claims of business trips failed to elicit suspicion, even as he transported groceries, construction materials, and furniture into the basement. On April 19, 2008, Josef reluctantly agreed to seek medical attention for the eldest daughter Kirsten, aged 19, after she fell unconscious in the underground chamber. Elisabeth, while seizing a rare opportunity for freedom, assisted Fritzl in carrying Kirsten out of the chamber, which granted her a brief but profound glimpse of the outside world after more than 2 decades of captivity. However, Fritzl's heartless actions quickly shattered any hope of lasting freedom, as he forced Elisabeth to return to the chamber, where she endured her last agonizing week of isolation. Meanwhile, Kirsten was rushed to a local hospital, the Landesklinikum Amstetten, in critical condition, and upon her arrival, medical professionals were immediately struck by Kirsten's alarming appearance, as her skin was utterly pale and nearly transparent, as though looking like it was revealing her veins completely. As doctors attempted to access her medical history, they encountered a shocking revelation. Kirsten's name was nowhere to be found in any database, suggesting that she had been kept somewhere hidden from the world until now. Further examination revealed that Kirsten was in critical condition, suffering from life-threatening kidney failure exacerbated by a severe vitamin D deficiency. Josef presented a note purportedly written by Kirsten's mother to Dr. Albert Reiter, and engaged in deceptive discussions regarding Kirsten's condition and the contents of the alleged note. As the medical staff pressed for answers, Josef just frantically insisted that Kirsten was one of his granddaughters. Despite their insistence on contacting the mother for vital medical information, Josef evaded or outright refused to provide crucial details, fueling the doctor's growing suspicion and irritation. With mounting doubts about Josef's credibility, the medical staff took the decisive step of alerting the police on April 21. In response, the police issued a public appeal through various media channels, urging the missing mother to step forward and provide crucial information about Kirsten's medical history. Concurrently, the police reopened the case file on Elisabeth's disappearance, reigniting efforts to uncover the truth behind her mysterious absence. Despite repeated assertions from Josef about Elisabeth's involvement with a cult, accompanied by what he claimed to be her most recent letter, dated January 2008, and posted from the town of Chemnitz, doubts continued to mount. Seeking expert opinion, the police consulted a church officer with expertise in cults, Manfred Wolfart, who cast skepticism on Josef's narrative, highlighting inconsistencies in Elisabeth's letters, and expressing reservations about the existence of the purported cult group described by Josef. Amidst the unfolding chaos, Elisabeth persisted in her plea to Josef for medical attention, and after a week of relentless begging, on April 26, Elisabeth's desperate plea for medical attention finally reached a critical juncture, when Josef allowed her, along with her sons Stefan and Felix, to leave the dark confines of the cellar and ascend to the world above. However, his concession came with strict conditions, under which Elisabeth was to adhere to the fabricated story Josef had concocted, or face severe consequences. With Josef by her side, Elisabeth made her way to the hospital, where Kirsten was receiving urgent medical care. Dr. Albert, who had been treating Kirsten, grew suspicious and alerted the authorities about Josef and Elisabeth's presence. Acting swiftly on this tip-off, the police apprehended Josef and Elisabeth on the hospital grounds, promptly taking them into custody for questioning, which marked the beginning of the end of Josef Fritzl's reign of terror, and the long-awaited liberation of Elisabeth and her children from their years of captivity and suffering. Initially hesitating to reveal anything to the police, Elisabeth then agreed to unfold the harrowing tales, only when she was assured that she would be shielded from ever encountering her father again. In a marathon of courage spanning 2 hours, she unraveled everything about the haunting saga of her 24-year-long captivity. As the clock ticked past midnight, marking the culmination of a painstaking investigation, the long arm of the law finally caught up with Josef Fritzl. Aged 73, Josef was apprehended on the 26th of April, under the weighty suspicion of committing grave atrocities against his own flesh and blood. Amidst the chaos, Josef provided investigators with the means to unlock the hidden door, leading to the chamber in which Elisabeth had spent nearly a quarter of a century. As the night of April 27 unfolded, a scene of rescue and revelation played out as Elisabeth, her children, and her mother Rosemary were gently taken into the care of authorities. Rosemary stood bewildered as she saw her world shattering by the revelation of the atrocities concealed beneath her own roof, and completely unaware of the nightmare her daughter had endured in the shadows. 3 days later, on April 29, the web of depravity surrounding Josef tightened, as DNA evidence conclusively linked him as the biological father of his daughter's children. But despite this damning revelation, Josef's defense lawyer, Rudolf Mayer, maintained that further evidence was required to substantiate the allegations of rape and enslavement. However, a disturbing twist emerged during an Austrian police press conference on May 1, where it was revealed that Josef had coerced Elisabeth into writing a letter the previous year, hinting at a twisted plan for her release. The letter, crafted under duress, suggested Elisabeth's desire to return home, yet ominously proclaimed it wasn't feasible at the time. Confirming their suspicions, Josef reportedly admitted to authorities that his intention was to release Elisabeth and her children from her basement prison, but to fabricate a narrative of her rescue from a supposed cult she had fled years prior. The commencement of Josef's trial on March 16, 2009, marked a pivotal moment in the quest for justice for his heinous crimes. Held in the city of St. Pölten, and overseen by Judge Andrea Humer, the proceedings began with Josef's attempt to shield his face from the cameras behind a blue folder. In a startling turn of events, Josef pleaded guilty to a litany of charges, save for murder and grievous assault, the latter related to his threat of gassing his captives if they dared to defy him. As the trial unfolded, Rudolf Mayer sought to humanize Josef's activities by portraying him as something other than a monster, citing the seemingly benign gesture of bringing a Christmas tree to his captives in the cellar during the holiday season. The harrowing saga of Josef Fritzl's atrocities continued to unfold in the courtroom as jurors bore witness to 11 hours of recorded testimony by Elisabeth that were captured during sessions with police and psychologists in July 2008. Her ordeal proved so overwhelming that the jurors could only endure watching 2 hours at a time, which prompted the standby presence of 4 replacement jurors, in case any regular jurors reached their limit of hearing the horrifying saga. In addition to the testimonial mosaic, Elisabeth's elder brother Harold bravely stepped forward and recounted his own childhood experiences of physical abuse at the hands of his father. Despite the weight of the evidence, Josef's wife Rosemary and Elisabeth's children chose not to testify, perhaps unwilling or unable to confront the horrors inflicted upon them by a man who had masqueraded as a husband and father. On the second day of the criminal trial against her father, Elisabeth attended with a book that she wrote about her sufferings. As her video testimony echoed through the courtroom, Rudolf Mayer confirmed the chilling moment when Josef realized Elisabeth's presence, stating, "Josef Fritzl recognized that Elisabeth was in court, and from this point on, you could see Josef Fritzl going pale, and he broke down. It was a meeting of eyes that changed his mind." On March 19, 2009, Josef Fritzl faced the weight of justice, as he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 15 years. In a rare moment of acceptance, he acknowledged the severity of his crimes and declared his decision not to appeal the sentence. With his fate sealed, Josef was confined to Garson Abbey, which now serves as his prison, where he is left to confront the consequences of his depravity, serving out his sentence as a living testament to the triumph of justice over monstrous cruelty.